Hi, thanks for tuning in. Trinity Square Video is very excited to present this conversation between Suzanne Kite and Devin Ronneberg as part of their exhibition, Seeing is Believing, co-presented by imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival. Seeing is Believing is an assemblage of works by Kite and Ronneberg that considers the parallels between nuclear development, artificial intelligence, and their consequential relationship to family history, collective narratives, and Indigenous ontologies. This exhibition includes an interactive video, AI-generated prints, sculptures, and a laser installation, all of which illustrates the artist's colloquial radioactive realities, which are brought on by uranium extraction and Western imperialist war making. This conversation will be moderated by Cornum, who is a prolific writer and scholar, a member of the Navajo Nation, and currently an assistant professor of Native American Studies at NYU. Lou has written essays, criticism, book reviews, and letters on a range of topics, including nuclear colonialism, outer space, art, queer life, Indigenous futurism, and science fiction. So thank you for joining us today, Lou, and I'll pass it on to you to steer the conversation.
Thank you, Karina. Yeah, it is really exciting to be in conversation with Devin and Suzanne. I feel like we've been either explicitly in conversation before or have been kind of in like an orbit around each other's ideas and creation and practices. So it's really cool to kind of be gathered today, even through Zoom world. So yeah, I just wanted you first both to introduce yourself, whatever you think people should know about you as they engage your work. We'll start with Devin.
Okay, cool. I'm Devin Ronneberg. I'm an artist, but I'm also an engineer, programmer. I work with sculpture, I work with image making. I work a lot with AI installation, so kind of trying to cover a lot of different zones with it. I'm Okinawan and Native Hawaiian and broadly Western European in general. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk about the work.
Cool. Suzanne?
Very excited to be here. Hamatakiapi, Suzanne Kaidamacha Pikashto, Alala Hamacha, Chante Washtianape Chuzapo, my relatives, I shake your hands with a happy heart. So my name is Suzanne Kite, and I go by Kite for making art. I'm an Oglala Lakota performance artist, composer, academic, and I've spent a lot of time in the past few years working with Devin on various installations and developing different body interfaces and hair braid interfaces that sometimes use machine learning. I make a lot of different types of work, sculpture, visual, sound, and now I can say I think I do write a lot about this subject. And yeah, Devin and I have been working together since about, I don't even know what our first piece was, but for many years now. And yeah, this exhibition is actually like a summation of all of that time and conceptual intersection. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to start perhaps in an obvious place, but with the name of the exhibition, this idea that seeing is believing, because I kind of have the sense there's a somewhat like ironic undertone to it, but maybe you can get into that more. Just particularly thinking about like uranium, radiation, that there is so much of it that is spectacularly visible, like in the dropping of the atomic bomb, that enduring image of the mushroom cloud, right? But then there's also all of the effects that are harder to discern, particularly with the, as they call it, the naked eye.
Right.
So actually how radiation affects your body, these sorts of things. And there's like this concept in environmental studies of slow violence, right? So this violence that's like over really long periods of time, or kind of like under the visible spectrum of like human observation. So what are kind of all the ways that your work is taking up those sort of if not contradictions, those extremes of like nuclear reality in terms of visibility and the invisible.
Do you want to start, Suzanne?
Sure. So, you know, a lot of artists make work about nuclear warfare, and because it is such a pervasive and it affects so many people across the globe, and it will continue to affect them infinitely, it feels like. And so our approach to this has been for a while to start with the kind of unseen and unknowable connections between Devin and myself. And we realized that the connection was decisions made around World War II. It was, you know, our reality of intersecting in this timeline is a result of colonial decisions made over vast timelines. And so the thing that I think is unknowable about that is, how do we know what decisions made by our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents let us come in to make this artwork and speak right now on Zoom. Like, so many minute decisions had to be made, so much violence had to occur to our families, and that we see and as a microcosm or a macrocosm, I'm not sure which, of the way that radiation affects human bodies. Like, we cannot know when these particles move through the universe when they're going to touch us and how, but we do know that it happens disproportionately to our communities. So that is for certain. And so that the kind of worlds of human existence and oppression are calculated, as you point out in your essay, Irradiated International, which was the kind of the inspiration for this exhibition. That those worlds of intersection are how we see ourselves in connection with the unseen, because we can never know how history would have unfolded if things had gone differently. But, you know.
Right. And just to follow up on that, to speak to your point, Lou, about the irony potentially in the title, I think that we are definitely speaking towards the tension between the very, very visible nature of the like horror and destruction of specifically nuclear technologies. But with this whole project, we're sort of making a direct association between the development of nuclear technologies in the 20th century and then now the development of AI technologies in the 21st century, both being like super transformative technologies that kind of change human experience, but also the experience of everything on the planet on pretty much every level, from like social and theoretical and political and all these things to very physical levels, biological levels, atomic levels. And yeah, so nuclear technology and AI technologies, as we're sort of relating them together and putting them in conversation with one another, like speak to this tension between the very visible and tangible things that are kind of obvious that we see, like the destruction of the nuclear weapon, or the, you know, quote unquote benefits that AI can bring to us through, you know, modern conveniences. But then there's also all of the invisible things, which are much more insidious even than the like visible destruction and danger that they pose to all of us. With AI, obviously, you know, we have all these conveniences that are coming up. Things are easier now. We can type without thinking or whatever. We can generate art with a sentence. But then we're also having all of our data collected, and we're all being flattened into tiny data sets that then describe all of our behavior collectively in a way that allows people to profit more easily off of us. And then in terms of nuclear stuff, obviously there's the visible explosions and all this, but then you have the invisible radiation that's going to linger and poison the planet and everything on it for, you know, centuries and generations. So I think that the irony in that is like seeing is believing, but there's also so much more to believe beyond what is seen. And it's really important for that to be sort of dug up and pointed out and then like talked about and continued on. a big part of this project has also been thinking about sort of conspiracy. I mean, along with the nuclear and AI stuff, we've gotten into really, really long, in-depth conversations about specifically aliens, but the ways in which these sort of like, I would say American myths. I know it's not just like an American myth, or it's not just an American phenomenon, but like specifically the way that nuclear technology in America relates directly to American conceptions of aliens and the other in that way, like anything other than terrestrial. Yeah, so we've gotten into a lot of conversations about that and just thinking about the nature of conspiracy and its effect on belief, and then how belief then affects people's or leads people to action. So it's, you know, how these intangible thought processes and mythologies that are sometimes based in reality, but then always mixed with lots of other convoluted things, how those stories and conceptions then lead people to very, very real action, and sort of how people base how people place themselves in the world and in the universe and understand their connection to the earth and then everything else in a modern context. So Fever Dream, one of the pieces in the show, is specifically speaking to the nature of not necessarily like overt conspiracy, but the way that information and the way that we receive it in all these fragmented ways leads us to believe these things that we're seeing that are presented to us, even when we're not getting the full story. And I'm not even talking about like media isn't presenting us the full story. Often we're only seeing small portions of that media too. And so we're creating these fragmented landscapes of information that then, you know, lead us to believe certain things, but it's always based on partial information, and therefore everybody has a different conception of the universe, even when they think they're consuming the same information. So yeah, that's a little bit about how the title sort of came to be. And I think the meaning of it has morphed over several years. Seeing is believing was originally, I think, what Fever Dream was going to be called like several years ago, but it was going to be in a totally different iteration. It's going to be a short film. And then over time, it morphed and turned into this whole other interactive thing. And so we decided to title the whole exhibition Seeing is Believing, after where it sort of came from. So.
Well, yeah, I want to stay with Fever Dream for a bit. I really relate to what you were saying, Suzanne, about kind of like this, like almost like feeling of vertigo you get when you try to place yourself within like the continuum of history, and just like realizing all of the kind of like things that had to happen to make your existence possible, or which have foreclosed possibilities for you in your life, not just like individually, but collectively. And you were addressing that in terms of kind of thinking about like, yeah, the history of the development of the atomic bomb, and our like increasingly irradiated reality. But I'm curious, because Fever Dream seems to bring together your work on like nuclearism, but also has this like AI interface aspect. If you both could talk about how you kind of like personally got interested in AI technologies, how you see that kind of, you know, where are the larger historical forces of AI intersecting with your personal life? And what are sort of the inspirations for bringing that into your practice, but also becoming like a intellectual interest?
Yeah, I'll start so I am on hopefully the last week or so of writing my dissertation on the subject, and I've come to understand that I'm happy. I now no longer consider AI to be something separate, but I consider it another computational tool, and with the like all objects in this world, with the possible potential to have interiority. And I don't separate it out from other computational materials anymore. Instead, I see the potential of all things to be alive with spirit, because it's not my decision. So how I got that and how we kind of got into this using AI stuff is I originally used machine learning for a piece called Listener in 2018. I started building it in like 2017. And another artist introduced me to Wekinator, Letitia Sonami, and I had already been building body interfaces, and Devin had already been doing interactive LiDAR sensor pieces and his installation practice. And so I think the more I thought about AI and machine learning, the more it got involved in conversations with my advisor, Jason Edward Lewis. And those conversations turned into a paper called Making Kin with the Machines, with Nolani Arista, Hawaiian historian, and Arch Pachowis, who's a Cree performance artist. And then it morphed even more, and then it became this gigantic Indigenous protocols and AI position paper. And yeah, and then it got into my PhD. And so I think with AI, AI helps open a window towards asking about interiority, and it also opens a window to asking like what is ethical or unethical about our computational artworks that we're making, and can I think more critically about it? I think with another sculpture Devin and I made called Telling Rock or Little Picture, those two sculptures, we were trying to do something with machine learning where we tried to do something good. We tried to explore the limits of ethical art making, and we discovered that it's impossible. Of course it's impossible. It's impossible to make something with computational materials and have it all be ethical. It's not right now, it's just not an option.
Mm-hmm.
But then with Fever Dream, I think we did the opposite, where we said, okay, we're going to use AI. Or so the AI in Fever Dream is specifically in the language processing, so the subtitles, and that one's using GPT-2, and we said, let's use all the most unethical tools we have at our disposal, especially deep faking, which is very unethical, and pour it into one critique of a melting together of how we see nuclear power and the wielding of AI as both very destructive to oppressed peoples, and we see them as Indigenous people as important enough to consider being critical of. So yeah, that's kind of how I see the AI in this piece and how we got to using it.
Yeah, just to speak about how I got interested in using AI technologies in general. Actually, Suzanne and I were on a residency in Tijuana, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, maybe. Can't really remember what year it was at this point. I had always been interested in like computation in general, in computers. I've been a computer nerd since I was a small child. But it wasn't until I first started to see deepfakes coming out that I was like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. Like, there are people out there that are not going to realize that this is being faked and doctored, and that it only takes like one person on a home computer, like a few hours or days, to make something that looks totally believable and is fakeable in pretty much every way. To realize the amount of power in that technological solution, just freaked me out. And honestly, the fear of how far that sort of thing was going to go, that it erodes our connection or our ability to discern between reality and something that is fake, is a terrifying thought. I mean, we're already so disconnected from like what maybe a base reality really is, or what human experience was for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, right? Like, what did it mean to be human 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, versus what it means to be human now, or what the experience of being human is within our societal context. And I think that technology, while it makes all these things much more convenient and much faster, and I mean, it enhances our capabilities in so many ways, but I would argue that maybe that's part of like maybe the antithesis to what the experience of being human was before, that everything had such gravity because it was so much more difficult to do, and it required considering your relationality to one another, but also to the earth and to all the non-human inhabitants of the earth. You had to really consider the things you were taking from the earth, because we couldn't just mass produce, mass extract, and mass exploit for our own convenience. So as things have gotten easier and there's more barriers between us and that experience of reality, and even now even the process of creating fake realities, of making fake visions of reality, has become so convenient and so easy that now it's like primed and ready to be taken advantage of for terrible stuff. I mean, deep faking does not have a lot of good uses, like straight up. I've thought about it for many years now, and that was kind of the thing that I was originally starting. I was like, well, can we take this crazy technology and do something like maybe okay, good with it? And so far now I've fully learned how to deepfake. I started learning when we were in that residency in Tijuana, and now I've made a whole series of work that's based on just deepfaking. Like, it's mostly just being critical of people in the present by finding characters from the past that are that have done things that we've already made judgments and assumptions about as society, or as collectively as individuals even. So I have a couple deepfakes that are now in Fever Dream. One of them is like Elon Musk being deepfaked onto the guy from the Heaven's Gate cult. The long, hours long tapes of him just spewing craziness about, salvation through the evacuation of the body, and that our souls will go up into space and join some like overlord up there. And the truth is, I don't really see all that much difference between like the Heaven's Gate cult and like the cult of Elon. Like, they're both based in like this almost like celebration of the evacuation of the body and the evacuation of the planet, in search of some salvation elsewhere, when we're already here. Like, we're in the good place. Like, we got the good rock in the universe, right? Or as far as we can see, at least in this solar system, right? And here we are forsaking that for some, unknown, very difficult thing that's going to require a whole lot of suffering to do in the name of like some guy that's just a talking head on TV or whatever. So I also have Jeff Bezos on Robert Oppenheimer giving the famous, Bhagavad Gita speech. So that was the one thing that I thought was like maybe relevant and poignant, was to like use it as an opportunity to critique in that way, drawing associations irrespective of time between different characters, because characters, do they pop up it's not like all that different throughout history, so those made it into that, and that was kind of my first real interest in like doing a hard AI thing. I was like, I need to learn how to deepfake. I'm going to do whatever it takes, go through all the disgusting, terrible forums where people are just like making, celebrity porn or something, because that's the only place that you can find the instructions on how to do it. I wasn't looking at all the stuff, but that's like where people are talking about it. So it's like, it's so obvious how terrible this technology is, and the ways that people want to use it to abuse people's, trust and character and image in all these various ways. So it was definitely an attempt to reclaim that and use it for something else, but also within that, I had to face how terrible and destructive it was. From there, then we obviously started using GPT-2, collating lots of texts that we like to generate new texts that were sort of an assemblage of all the things that we're interested in. And that's what ultimately ended up making the subtitle text that's in Fever Dream, that's kind of playing in the center over whatever's in the center of the screen. And then since then, I've gotten into a lot of different using AI for all sorts of different stuff. Went from voice cloning to now the other work that I have in this show, Revisionist Histories, is based on AI style transfer algorithms, basically. And I can go into that one maybe in a different section so we can wrap this one up. But hopefully that explained some of the backstory you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I share both your interest in the Heaven's Gate cult, as well as this like skepticism or maybe even more strongly stated feelings against people like Elon Musk. But it is interesting, yeah, thinking about Heaven's Gate as the kind of like proto tech cult that seems to be like also following Musk and his ideas about leaving the planet, but also this like idea of humans existing in a simulation. So yeah, but really bringing together, like as you were describing, the evacuation of the body and the evacuation of the planet in a way that I think is like so sinister. And I've gotten kind of troubled by a lot of the like post-human discourse that circulates in both our academic circles and a lot in the arts as well. And I think that there, I mean, it's become such a cliche, the idea of like, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. But I think there's also this new kind of idea that it's easier to just imagine like the post-human than thinking about creating like ethical human relationships to each other, to the earth, or to machines, as you were talking about, Suzanne, making kin with the machines. So I'm just sort of curious if you want to speak about that more in the context of pieces in the show or the larger work that you have, sort of what to your mind is both the future of the human and what kind of like histories of the human are you drawing on to think about that?
Yeah, I think my approach to futurist or futurism now, it's really grown. I was very much a dystopia addict back in 2017, 2018. I had never had any practice thinking optimistically. And I think in the process of really questioning why I'm using different technologies and what technology is to me, and what human is, what spirit is, what is out of my control in the world. I think in going through that process, I understand that our most powerful technologies are our ability to create relationships with humans and non-humans, seen and unseen. Those technologies never go away, and our skills and our indigenous ways of making new knowledge are generative and emergent. They always will come back to us. They, just because certain techniques of them are chosen to go away, doesn't mean we can't access them and access new ways again. And I think that understanding that not just culture, but like our epistemologies and our ontologies, our ways of identifying beings, our ways of making knowledge are eternal because our connection with our ancestors is eternal, that you can get to those things again. And the technologies that we're dealing with now and the world that feels so dystopian is new, and is very young. And we have our stories and our myths and our knowledge that things have been corrected in the past, and we've gone down wrong paths, and we've understood our mistakes and made right with our non-human kin. And taking that into, and then actually the most I've learned about the future is from Afrofuturists who have a much longer relationship to imagining future collectively. I learned a lot in terms of hope from them, and I think that in that process, I've freed my imagination to be able to to get to new places. And actually this exhibition is kind of uniquely negative of us. We've spent a lot of time thinking very positively and making new technologies and thinking about possibilities of listening into the unknown in a healthy way. And so this is a slice of our work that says that we have to listen in that other way, and some of the other works that we do.
Mhm.
Yeah, this exhibition, I think most of the pieces are very much rooted in like a fear and repulsion of the state of things and where they're headed. And I mean, that's maybe a bit cliche because like who's not, right? But in that way, you know, Fever Dream was very much this whole sort of look at the conspiratorial, like the generation of belief on a mass scale and how that functions, at least from like a personal level, like how these fragments of information get into our lives and then become sort of the foundation of a belief structure. And while I'm not just taking everything at face value and definitely thinking more critically about things than that, that piece was sort of a bit of an ironic joke in that way. Whereas revisionist histories was kind of taking a much more serious approach and tone to the consideration of like AI technologies and nuclear technologies, and ultimately like how my existence specifically is like predicated on all of the events of history, specifically the dropping of the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and the invasion of Okinawa immediately preceding all of that. Like if that had not happened, I wouldn't exist, like at least not in this body, right? Just to give a brief story, because I was hoping to be able to cover this in this conversation anyway. My grandmother was born in on Oahu to a Okinawan father and a half Chinese, half Hawaiian mother. And because of the politics of the family at the time, basically my great-great-grandparents had gone back to Okinawa to live. They lived in Hawaii, had a restaurant for many years, and then decided to go back to Okinawa. My great-grandfather decided not to go back. So in some sort of like fealty family honor move, basically his mother and father had convinced them to give up their firstborn daughter to take back to Okinawa to attempt to carry on the family name. So that was my grandmother. She born in Hawaii as an American citizen, but before she was 1 year old, was shipped back to Okinawa to live with her grandparents. So she grew up her whole life in Okinawa in our family village. And that's all she knew. She only spoke Japanese. She didn't speak any English. I mean, her grandmother and her grandfather were basically her parents, as far as I know she knew that they were her grandparents, but for all intents and purposes, they were her parents, right? Then, of course, World War II breaks out, the Battle of Okinawa, the invasion of Okinawa happens. My family's village is totally destroyed, razed to the ground. My grandmother and her grandparents flee the village and are wandering through the hillsides for days while bombs are dropping all around them. One night, my great-great-grandfather, they were all hiding in a cave. He like sat up to look outside to see what was happening, and a bomb dropped and shrapnel came and hit him and killed him as he was laying next to my grandmother and her grandmother. So basically they just experienced the totality of the horrors of war in a way that I will never understand. And this was all happening to her when she was like 9 years old, right? They're just fleeing from this horror brought on by the people that she is actually a citizen of their country, right? Eventually they get captured by the Americans. My grandmother and her grandmother at the time had totally lost it. I mean, the horrors that she had just experienced, the death of her husband, all of this happening within like the span of a few days or a week or so. She had the wherewithal when they got captured to say, she's an American, like she's one of yours. And so they immediately separated them. My grandmother never saw her grandmother again. And then they shipped her back to Hawaii and dropped her on the doorstep of her parents, who had completely like basically moved on, right? The pain of having to give her up, they totally separated themselves from, had two more daughters that they never told. like that they had a sister that lived in Okinawa. And she didn't speak any English, couldn't converse with her mother. Like there's all this, my grandmother's whole life was just basically this long chain of like difficulty and pain brought on by like colonial imposition and imperial attitudes and destruction, right? And but all of that set the stage for her to come back to the States to then meet my grandfather when she joined the military, ironically. And then to start their life. Like that was the happiest time in her life, was meeting my grandfather, you know, getting together and then moving and having children. Obviously then my mother was born, and that set the stage for me to be born. But without all that pain, without the colonial imposition, the predicating circumstances for my existence wouldn't have happened. So that whole thing, like for me, has been a real brain bender for the last several years. Is just thinking about all of the pain and violence necessary for me to exist, and how does that shape my experience of reality? How does that shape the way that I feel and think and see, right? And I have a desire to understand the things that she went through in a way that I will never actually be able to, right? But I want to understand. I want to empathize with it. I want to, on some level, experience that in a way that I can, in order to share the feeling of it for others, and maybe the sadness I have for what she had to go through. And be able to share that with others in a way that helps them to imagine if those things were happening to them as well, right? So maybe they don't have those same considerations and circumstances in their life that are then prompting them to make those decisions, to think about those things in a way that feels directed at them, instead of like something that maybe, instead of a celebration of a victory, like the feeling of loss of being attacked in that way, like having the, you know, full force of the American military come and invade your island and destroy your village, or the dropping of the largest weapon ever on a populated city, you know, like the weight of these things is incredible. So
the images are of Los Angeles, but they're in the style of, you know, maybe explain the.
right. So there's the whole, sorry, that was a long tangent, but anyway, I don't know if you know the artists Iri and Toshi Maruki. They made a series of panels called the Hiroshima panels, that were basically just depictions of the horrors of the nuclear war, dropping the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those panels, they're beautiful works of art. They're also like quite horrific and visceral. They got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1995 for basically their I mean, it was this span of 30 years of work between this married couple, and the images were like an inspiration for anti-nuclear war, you know, momentum and projects for many years. So I took images from those panels, trained them into a style transfer AI, and was attempting to basically extract the style of war from these images and then apply it to images of celebration of VJ Day and VE Day in Los Angeles and various places. So basically, it turned these celebrations in the streets, thousands of people excited that there was a victory of America over Japan, into these images as if the bomb had dropped in Los Angeles. And it turned all these bodies into these mangled, fleeing shadows, essentially, and it set all the buildings on fire and all these other things. So using the power of AI as a lens to see alternative realities, other possibilities that history could have taken, other paths, in order to, you know, flip the script and see from the other side, and consider how we would feel if that had happened to us, and then hopefully warn against it.
Yeah, Los Angeles is, so that's where both of us are from. I was born in Sylmar, and I think Los Angeles is a good backdrop for that, because I mean, so I'll give a very shortened history. I'm 2 generations adopted, you know, into Los Angeles. So, you know, my grandmother moved to Los Angeles through this Indian Relocation Act, as many family members did, in order to secretly have a child, which was my mother. and then she also gave me up for adoption in the county of Los Angeles. But you know, Los Angeles has a large Hawaiian population. Actually, it has a large Native American population, and it does sometimes feel like a vector of histories that intersect. And I think that it is. I mean, there's millions of people in the world, billions of people. Like, the chance that Devin and I would meet and make art is very low, actually, and that we'd be able to think about these things. And I think artworks are like stones that you know, you come and you meet a stone or you see a star, and it is so unlikely that you would do so, and it's so unlikely that we get to make art in this lifetime, and that these specific artworks. And so, you know, another interesting intersection is we discovered at one point that Devin's grandfather, who comes from a family of people who were involved in World War II in Norway, you know, he spent a lot of time at the bar in Los Angeles that my mother spent a lot of time at. And they both, you know, it's one bar. It's just very unlikely that, you know, we didn't know each other then. So it feels like Los Angeles is this place of worlds colliding, so we could make this work.
Oh yeah, it's incredible and mind-boggling, right? To think about all of those, as you call it, like vectors of history that we're kind of like writing, and occasionally can kind of see the trajectory of and try to maybe grasp and reroute. But there's so many both small and huge like coincidences that are like structuring those very possibilities. It's just fascinating to hear your sort of individual histories, but then yeah, all of those ways where they come together at these crossroads of colonialism, empire, and like trying to think about rerouting the lines that brought us together to make different sort of geographies possible, or different relations possible. And so it's really cool to hear about your kind of ongoing collaboration. And I guess as way of conclusion, just like to welcome both of you to speak to any of the pieces that we haven't like addressed yet that you think are important, but also kind of maybe give us a little bit of what's next. Is this project continuing? I mean, these are huge concepts. It feels like they're still really central to your thinking and your practice. So is there kind of an evolution of these particular works? You'd said it was sort of your more cynical mode. What are some of the kinds of things that you're excited to do in the coming years?
Yeah, I'll say that the two pieces we didn't talk about are Aguya Obscula, which is 3 cakes, and that's from a larger performance piece. But those 3 cakes, they're fake cakes, and there's a process of mourning in my community that we don't really know where it comes from, but involves putting the face of somebody who has passed on a cake and serving it. I think it's Eastern European based. That's just very specific to South Dakota. But these pieces mourn the environmental impacts of uranium mining in northern Saskatchewan. So this is the Crown Corporation from 1953 to 1982. Operated the Beaver Lodge uranium mine, and they contaminated watersheds in the Uranium City, and it affected the food chain. So it's there's 3 beings being mourned. It's the large game in the area, elk, and mourning the watershed itself, and then mourning the mined material, the uranium that like all mined materials that are wrenched from the ground without our Indigenous pathways of reciprocity, and we know not to take those things out of the ground. And as in your essay, you address that, and that's yeah. So those cakes mourn that, and the other piece is time diffracted, and it's a cluster of crystals with a green laser at about foot level, and it casts kind of a green glow. And it's cartoonish in a way, you know, the idea of uranium and glow, but that's more of a reference to like concepts of diffraction that author Karen Barad writes about, just a way to kind of bring the movement of light and wave particles into the space. And then I guess I'll wrap up by saying about my next process is to really deal with dreams and visions, or the same word, Hamla in Lakota, but to understand that knowledge, especially good knowledge, comes channeled through our human bodies in the forms of dreams or visions, and that we already have like really strong methodologies for communicating with non-humans, and it's through those dreams that they're possible. So I hope to marry that kind of dream work with artificial intelligence processes. So maybe we can dream with, or our dreams be elucidated, illuminated by a computer, and that'll be really long process, hopefully, and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this particular show feels sort of like a culmination of so many ideas that we've had over the last, like, I don't know, 3/4 of a decade. So that's not to say that these pieces won't continue to live on and develop. I mean, even Fever Dream, this is one iteration of it, but we now have done several that include different sort of clips in the structure of the installation that speak to different things. This one is definitely speaking from more of like an Indigenous perspective and trying to bring those considerations into this particular work. But we also have some others that deal a little bit more directly with AI and the weaponization of technologies that are being developed. And so it's more of like a framework for a piece than it is actually like a static thing itself. So I assume that that's going to continue to change and develop as we consider other things and other things come up, especially with everything that's going on right now with nuclear stuff in Russia and the politics of all that. So, and then personally, outside of our collaborative work, I've been working a lot with creating basically neural network systems for performance that rely on like body tracking and attempting to understand how artificial intelligence sees the body and can interpret it into other forms of media and interaction. So I'm definitely going to be making some work based on that and the politics of being seen by machines and trying to understand how that all plays out essentially, and the ways in which we can maybe reclaim that and start to use it for more beneficial and creative things rather than things that flatten the dimensionality of the human experience into like a series of bits and then use that to profit. So basically anything other than that I'm open to at this point. So yeah, I don't know, I'm sure we're going to keep.
Yeah, I do want to make a plug for the origin of our dealing with aliens comes from a multi-day argument we had a while ago, where we did not agree about believing in aliens. I was like, it's like American military conspiracy. Anyway, that argument grew into a ridiculously long paper, which is now published, called "What's on the Earth is in the Stars, and What's in the Stars is on the Earth." And I'm proud of that paper. So, and I quote you at length, Lou. So, yeah, that's definitely a product of trying to imagine all of these things and continue our long conversation. I do want to finish by saying that I'm very proud of this exhibition, and this is it's really wonderful to be in a really long conversation with somebody and argue about stuff for a really long time and be able to make work that reflects a deep, long engagement with your work, Lou, and each other's work. So.
And I think we came out of that argument after whatever 7-8 years, mostly in agreement. Now we're basically on the same page about most things. So I think, yeah, it's been a fantastic way to sort through all of these questions that we've had together for many, many years, and be able to connect to so many other interesting pathways of thought, especially your essay, Lou. Thank you so much, because it really has informed a lot of what ended up in this show specifically, and has been a big inspiration for years. So I'm really appreciative for that. And thank you for being here and being in conversation with us. It means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like a pleasure really to, be able to like think deeply with people who are like trying to capture all that complexity. So yeah, the love is shared for sure. And it's such a beautiful process that you all have been engaging in. I'm excited to see what grows out of it. And hopefully everybody that's listening in whatever time space that they're encountering this also goes out and seeks out those works that are kind of part of the larger universe of our shared thinking. So thank you both.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kite and Devin, for coming together and sharing so much about yourselves and your work. There's like a lot to digest and think about there. Just popping back in to say that Devin and Kite's exhibition is on display until November 12th. And also please check out all of the awesome programming as part of this year's imagineNATIVE Film Festival. That's on until 30th of October. And yeah, thanks guys.
You.